and welcome to the program. I'm your host, Patty Pagaling, with Pesticide-Free Ojai Valley and Transition to Organics. And we're here tonight to discuss the health effects of thousands of gallons of toxic pesticides and herbicides in our environment, specifically those being applied by government agencies in the Upper Ventura River watershed in efforts to eradicate an invasive bamboo-like plant known as Arundodonax. The chemical being used is called Aquamaster by Monsanto, and the active chemical of concern is called glyphosate. And here to discuss the effects of glyphosate on human health and on all of the animal life in our watershed is a doctor from Ojai with a specialty in environmental medicine, Dr. Robin Bernhoft. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much. Good to be here.
So I understand that you began as a liver and pancreatic surgeon.
Liver and pancreatic. General surgeon with a subspecialty in liver and pancreatic, yeah. I did a fellowship in liver and pancreatic in London after finishing surgery at UCSF, and then went to the University of Washington and was up there for a bunch of years, but I got sick. I ended up getting really, really sick, almost died, and it turned out it was environmental illness. I had to learn environmental medicine to get my life back, and in the process got a whole new specialty and a whole new approach to medicine. So it essentially the problem was that I lacked an enzyme in the liver that clears a lot of stuff that I was exposed to just in the normal course of events, plus the operating room. I was doing 605 cases a year, leaving all this scrub solution on my hands and arms to prevent infection. It worked great. I mean, I didn't have really much of a problem with wound infections, but I was absorbing all this stuff. You know, it never occurred to me, A, that the skin wasn't that good a barrier against solvents and disinfectants and whatnot, and B, I used to do research at UCSF in liver excretion, and it never occurred to me I had a problem, but I do. I like one of the biggest enzymes for clearing that stuff, so it almost killed me. I mean, it was really nasty. And I'm not the only canary in the coal mine. Centers for Disease Control back in 2000 published a document that pretty much all chronic illness results from the combination of genetic susceptibility, like my funky liver, and environmental exposure. And you know what? I'm not the only person out there like that. About 40 to 50% of the American population have got major defects. The rest of them got minor ones. And when you start putting poisonous material in the watershed, like the supervisors are planning to do, and in fact are doing, it's not going to have a happy ending.
Well, also the fact that, as you've explained to me before, that we're like rain barrels.
Yeah.
And we fill up, we all have different capacity to handle a certain amount of toxins, but once you hit your limit, then you spill over with symptoms.
Then you're in a lot of trouble, and you get pretty much anything. You know, probably the best metaphor for this, back in the 70s, the farm workers in the Central Valley were getting sprayed with airplanes with malathion. And malathion is cleared by an enzyme called PON1. And these folks were followed for a long time. The farm workers that were born without PON1, like I was born without GSTM1, were really in a heap of trouble because they got sprayed with malathion, the stuff got into their bloodstream, they had no defense. It destroyed their nervous system. They had got el muerte andando, the walking death, this horrible neurodegeneration thing. Farm workers with normal levels of PON1 looked just fine for about 20 years. Then, 20, 25 years in that range, they started coming down with a ton of heart disease or cancer or diabetes or arthritis, pretty much the whole medical textbook. Intermediate levels of PON1, same spectrum, but at 15 years instead of 25. That's what CDC is talking about. This is 21st century medicine. You know, people get high blood pressure, they get cancer, they get arthritis, they get skin problems, whatever, because their ability to clear their bloodstream of poisonous junk is not up to the job of whatever they've been exposed to. So you get a big exposure like I did or like the farm workers did, you get into trouble. That's where chronic illness comes from. That's what CDC, listen to their language. Virtually all chronic human health problems result from genetic susceptibility and environmental exposure, which is why we're doing this show, and what I'm so vigorously opposed to the supervisor's idea to spray a poisonous chemical, glyphosate, in the water supply of this county. I think it's insane.
Well, it's not working either.
Well, it doesn't work. I mean, it's insane on every level. When we testified against this last year at the supervisors, the fact that it was sprayed in Matilaha Canyon and didn't work, Arundo is Roundup ready, you know. It gets stunted for a couple of weeks, then it grows right back, and you do it again, and it gets stunted, and it grows. It's like an accordion. I mean, it's crazy. But I presented the supervisor with 63 articles from peer-reviewed medical literature from the United States and Europe, some from Japan and Australia. 63 articles showing that glyphosate is associated with a very much increased risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, hairy cell leukemia, multiple myeloma, and Parkinson's disease.
Wow.
It's water soluble according to NIOSH, or the government branch of EPA. And you spray it on the riverbank, it gets in the water. Hello.
Well, also didn't
and people drink it.
Yeah.
And it's not good for people.
According to NIOSH, as I remember, it says do not let this into the environment.
Well, it's interesting the way they did it. It's a government document, and they have not N capital O capital T. I mean, with an exclamation point. I mean, government documents don't usually do that. That was a fact sheet for glyphosate. Do not let this into the environment. Our elected supervisors, folks, are planning to spray 12 tons of that in your water supply. You got a problem with that? I do. I mean, it's, you know, for my business as an environmental doc, it's great for business because there are going to be a whole lot of people suffering. But I'm trying to do preventive medicine here. I'm trying to keep that from happening. And, you know, when you present this kind of information to the supervisors that it doesn't work and it's dangerous, and there are real scientists in the United States and around the world that say it's very dangerous with 3 types of cancer and 1 horrible neurological condition, and they're going to do it anyway, even though it doesn't work, even though Lower Topanga and Pasadena sprayed 12 and 15 cycles, discovered it didn't work, cut the stuff off, put plastic down, and it died. Nice, safe, clean, non-toxic alternative. And they went ahead and did it anyway. What is the matter with people like that?
Well,
I mean, you can speculate. I did speculate, as a matter of fact, and Steve Bennett got very unhappy with me for, you know, slandering basically the supervisors. I'm not going to do it again, except maybe by inference. But when you got something that doesn't work, it's dangerous, there's a clean alternative, and you go ahead and do it anyway. What is your motive? I don't know. I wasn't there at the discussion.
well, as we know, all the universities are really funded by the big chemical corporations, so the biologists that are coming out of the universities have been schooled in believing that chemicals are the way to go. And it's really unfortunate that we have biologists who are overseeing these projects and okaying them.
Well, but you know, you had this program with Steve Sprinkle a while back. I mean, everybody took photographs up in Matillahawk Canyon. You spray it, it turns brown, 2 weeks later it's green again. It doesn't work. You don't need a scientist or somebody from a university to tell you that. All you need is eyes and a brain.
Right.
The eyes and the brain may not be that good if you keep drinking the water that they're spraying, but you know, short term you should be able to figure that out. It's not rocket science.
Yeah. Well, when I first came to you and we were talking about the effects of the glyphosate on me personally, I showed you my rash and you saw how unsteady I was.
Yeah.
That was really a big change in my health that occurred when they started spraying.
Well,
and I've
yeah.
been feeling it every time they come into the canyon again, and they're doing it right now.
Yeah.
So I'm going through a little bit of nausea and headaches, and it's a constant awareness that I am having because they're going to be back for 5 more sprayings this year, and they're doing it right now. So
that raises an immediate question of why do they have to keep spraying it if it works?
it doesn't work.
Well, it doesn't
they've
work.
already done it.
But they know that.
This is the 7th spraying right now.
And it's still there. It doesn't
Yeah.
work. But I'm talking about your symptoms. I mean, there's a test you can do neurologically called a SPECT scan, where it's like your head is in a hairdryer, and it measures the blood flow in real time in the brain. You can actually watch the thing light up, so you can see there's plenty of blood over here, but not enough over there, kind of thing. And it fluctuates. When somebody gets like the balance disturbances and the symptoms you're getting, if we stuck you in the SPECT scanner, you're not going to have normal blood flow.
Mm.
And you could actually, if you could get somebody other than a Nazi to do the experiment, you could put somebody in a SPECT scanner, give them a little whiff of glyphosate, and watch what happens to the blood flow in their brain.
God.
Because that's what's happening.
Wow.
That's why people get Parkinson's. If it goes to other parts of your body, that's why they get non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, hairy cell leukemia, or multiple myeloma, which are 3 fatal cancers.
Huh.
Why are they doing this? Why are you putting 12 tons of it in the watershed? I mean, are we worrying about overpopulation in Ventura County? You know, when they're talking about getting non-native species, are they talking about human non-natives?
But
I was born in North Dakota. I mean,
Yeah.
they're trying to kill me?
The other part of it too is that they're not just going after the Arunda, which was their original excuse.
Yeah.
They have a list of many plants that are non-native doesn't have to be eradicated, but they're not eradicating anything.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because the quote-unquote environmental group that was set up by Monsanto to get rid of, I mean, it sounds like a nice kind of environmental goal to get rid of non-native species, up to a point. I mean, you know, the Chumash probably have a better opinion of that than those of us of European origin, because that gets a little close to home. You know, we're not native either. But if it sounds like a good environmental goal to get rid of non-native plant species, until you realize that the environmental group that has been pushing that was set up and remains funded by Monsanto as a way of selling Roundup or glyphosate.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
You know, the sheer diabolical cynicism of that is just breathtaking. This is a chemical, I mentioned the 63 articles from the world medical literature, peer-reviewed, real universities, real scientists, linking it to those neurological and cancerous problems. I'll give you one example. Farmers in western Minnesota who have a milder version of the liver defect I have, which afflicts about 40% of the population, if they use Roundup in agriculture, 6 times increase in the same stuff, hairy cell leukemia, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, Parkinson's, and multiple myeloma. People living within a quarter mile of their farms, same risk for the same problems. They didn't look at the drinking water, I don't know, but you know, putting this stuff in, 12 tons of it in the Ventura water supply, basically. How much of that are we going to have here? I don't know.
Yeah, well,
it's criminal as far as I can see.
Yeah, it's in the air, it's in the
And it's so
soil,
stupid. I mean, it's criminal
water.
negligence as far as I can see. I don't know why the supervisors are doing this.
Yeah.
I can only speculate, which is what upset Steve Bennett.
Right.
So I'm trying to find a rational explanation. There isn't any on the surface of it. Obviously it doesn't work. Obviously it's dangerous. Obviously they're doing it. Why?
So what can we do? What can we do to actually...
Well, I think that viewers of this program could call their supervisors and ask why. Why are you doing this? Why did you vote unanimously to do this? Why don't you cut the stuff down? They said the Army engineers wouldn't let them cut Arundo and put visqueen down. They let them do it in LA County. It's still the United States. Different Army engineers? I don't think so. That's bogus.
Yeah.
What is the benefit? And, you know, the question that lawyers are always asking, cui bono, who benefits? The people of Ventura aren't benefiting. People that drink water aren't benefiting. I'm okay. I got a filter in my water. It'll filter that stuff out. Most people don't. That's not fair. You're giving them a dangerous chemical without the means to defend themselves.
Yeah.
I got a problem with that. I think that's unethical. I think it's criminal. Criminally stupid, but also criminally dangerous.
There's a letter to the editor that I just read from the Ojai Valley News from a man who said that the people there are experiencing asthmatic. He wrote, let's see, eye and lung irritation.
From the spray.
Right, and the same company that sprayed Agent Orange in Vietnam in the 1960s is now injuring American citizens here at home. I wonder how many members of the Ventura Hillsides protested the Vietnam War and now are supporting the workers in hazmat suits spraying us with the same toxic poison. And this is a quote from the letter.
Well, there's a little difference. I mean, Agent Orange has got some other stuff in it in addition to glyphosate. So which one is the thing that caused all the brain cancer and all the problems in Vietnam? I don't know.
But it's the same company. That's
same
what
company, and there's some recent stuff about birth defects and miscarriages being caused by that. It'd be interesting if somebody did statistics on that. Is there an increase in miscarriages in Ventura County or Western Ventura County because of the spray? I don't know. It's been described in the medical literature. It is a risk factor for that. It is a risk factor definitely for causing birth defects. And it doesn't work. What part of that isn't obvious? I got a little irritated, as you may recall, with the supervisors at the meeting. I said, if you guys think you can spray tons of a dangerous chemical that NIOSH doesn't think should be involved in the environment, in the watershed, and not hurt your constituents, I'd like to get your email addresses, because I keep getting all these emails from Nigeria. People need help getting money out of their countries. I think perhaps you could help.
Yeah.
They didn't get it. They just, I don't know what's wrong with these people. I mean, do you have to be a moron to be elected to the supervisors? I don't know. I mean, that's a fair question because of what we've already said. It doesn't work. It's dangerous. It doesn't work. It's dangerous. It's in the water.
Well, and all across the country now, they're seeing that the use of the glyphosate product Roundup is creating super weeds.
Yeah.
And so we're creating super arundo, perhaps, you know.
Well, you think about it, you know, the plants have a 1-year life cycle. They've got a much better chance of evolving to respond to this stuff. We were around for maybe 60 or 80 years if they don't spray too much of this stuff. It's kind of hard for us to adjust. You know, and if we have enough birth defects, the children aren't going to adjust either. But
Right.
plants can do that. It happens all the time. In fact, one of the ironies, I forget who the scientist was that made this observation, but the whole idea of using poisonous chemicals on our food hasn't worked. 80 years ago, 1.15% of crops were lost to pests. Now, with all the chemicals, 15% of crops are lost to pests. It hasn't done anything. It's like carpet bombing in Vietnam. I mean, that didn't do anything either, you know.
Right.
But so we're poisoning. What we are doing is increasing a lot of allergy, asthma, autism, various types of cancer. A whole lot of other chronic illnesses are on the upswing. So it seems like it's not doing us a lot of good. It's not affecting the pests. They just, you know, die off. They get select a few that can resist, and then they have children, and off they go. It is extraordinarily stupid. The trouble is that the economics and the politics of this are not favorable. You know, the pesticide companies, big agriculture, and the drug industry are actually largely owned by the same corporations. And so you could argue that there's a vertical monopoly. You make people sick with the pesticides, and then you treat them with the drugs. You know, it's a double win for, you know, the business cycle for these people.
Right.
But I think it involves a degree of sociopathy, which, again, is criminal. You know, I tend to think that things ought to be done in a scientific way. You ought to think about stuff rationally. You know, look and see what the benefits are, what the costs are. Is this strategy effective? Can it actually work? If it does work, is it too expensive, either in terms of money or danger to the public? You know, there's a kind of a rational cost-benefit analysis that ought to be done with public policy.
Aren't there grants available from the chemical corporations to do these special, you know, eradication programs? I believe
Well, probably so. The whole business of grant getting is a very political thing. I mean, when I was at UCSF, I was doing research on liver physiology, and I didn't entirely, this is 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I didn't really entirely buy the cholesterol theory of heart disease, which now, you know, nobody, at least the investigators don't believe. It's actually oxidative stress that's the problem and not cholesterol. But anyway, I thought, well, if 90% of cholesterol comes from the liver and only 10% from the diet, wouldn't it be kind of cool to figure out what regulates cholesterol production in the liver? So I wrote this grant proposal and, you know, put it through the Human Research Committee at UCSF and went off to NIH. Came back a few months later, approved but not funded. So I tweaked it, sent it back. Next year came back, approved but not funded. My boss took me aside and he said, you know, I wouldn't send that in again. I said, why not? He said, well, it's a good study, but, you know, if you're right and you can fix heart disease with, you know, $5 a month worth of thyroid hormone or something like that, you're going to bankrupt. And he mentioned a couple of drug companies. He said, there's no way that NIH will allow you to ask a question ever that hurts a drug company. I was sort of shocked. I mean, I was an idealistic kid. I thought, wow, I thought I was working in an honest profession. But it's not the fault of the doctors. You know, the trouble is that the decision making, and it's not really the fault in a way of the politicians. You know, 2 years ago when Harkin and Obama were starting their health reform campaign, they spoke at an integrative medicine meeting in DC. And Harkin gave a very impassioned speech, which I could have given, basically saying that the Japanese and the Europeans spend way less money on health care. They get way better results because they look at underlying physiology, they look at causes of disease, and don't just throw expensive pills at symptoms. What we do in this country is throw expensive pills at symptoms for the most part. I mean, people like me would try to look at cause and try to, you know, deal with stuff at that level. But Harkin said, you know, until we start, well, actually Obama got up and he said, well, you're absolutely right, Tom. We need to incorporate this into the integrative medicine into the healthcare system. If we don't, we're going to bankrupt the country with medical expenses. Then he went on to say an interesting line. He said, the drug companies aren't going to like it, but we're ready for a fight. I have not heard one word about that since. I don't know if he was just blowing smoke. I mean, you know, he's a better politician than I am, and I know that the drug companies are the most powerful force in the United States. 33 of them made more money in 2005 than the rest of the Fortune 500 put together. including Microsoft and Exxon and British Petroleum. And so, I mean, got a lot of clout. They can lobby anybody you want anytime.
But a lot of the chemicals that are used in pesticides come from the oil companies too.
Well,
so
yeah,
it's all interconnected.
which are not as powerful as the drug industry. But the point I was trying to make is that the whole business of grant getting that we were talking about is a very political thing. When I was at the University of Washington, there was a guy that didn't get out of the Human Research Committee because the head of his lab said, if you're right, it's going to cost Upjohn or whoever it was, a lot of money. They're a big supporter of our lab. We're not going to go there. And in the last 20 years or so, this is one of the things that Marcia Angel, who ran the New England Journal of Medicine for 20 years, chief editor, she resigned and wrote a book called The Truth About the Drug Companies because, the difficulty in getting information to doctors, for example, is based on their influence. They basically started funding drug companies, or funding medical schools, funding postgraduate education, et cetera. So they pretty much call the shots, so doctors don't know about stuff. And it's the same phenomenon where politicians are up for re-election, they like contributions, and you've got pesticide companies, drug companies, oil companies that want influence, so they give them money. Have you ever heard of a congressperson retiring with less than $4 or $5 million in unspent campaign funds? No. I'll give you, to put that in context, up in Canada, about 7 or 8 years ago, I was listening to Canadian radio when I was up in Washington, and there was a huge scandal because a member of the BC Parliament in Victoria had gone fishing for a couple hours on Saturday afternoon with a lobbyist. And the Mounties went in and sealed off the office, took all of his records, and were questioning all of his staff to see how far the corruption went, because he fished for a couple hours with a lobbyist. But in this country, if it isn't 10 or 15 million bucks, nobody cares. So, there's a sort of culture of corruption at that level. But it also affects grant getting because you have the same sorts of pressures, like I said, with my grant. If I heard, these two drug companies, NIH wouldn't let me ask that question. That is something that comes up a lot. Most of the research that's been done on things like glyphosate has been done with university money, not with grant money, where they've got independent funding, so they're looking at a question that they could not get funded through NIH because of the political implications.
Another thing about pesticides is that when it's tested, the testing's done by the chemical corporation, the EPA just kind of rubber stamps it and says,
well, yeah,
okay,
this is true throughout. This is the regulatory thing is a joke all the way across the board. The FDA does that as well. I mean, all of these people just test their own stuff and say, oh yeah, it's good, it works great, it's clean, it's safe, it didn't hurt the rats. The French, this is true with GMO foods as well. I mean, there was, they did a 2-week trial in Europe on rats feeding GMO corn. And all the female rats had hemorrhagic pancreatitis and hemorrhages in their adrenals and their liver, but the males didn't. So Monsanto said, it's probably got nothing to do with us because the males don't have any problems. Wow. To which the French and the German government said, we got a lot of women in our countries. And 2-week trial's not good enough. We want 2 years. So they're at least putting some pressure on Monsanto.
Well, also, when they say that, a lethal dose only kills half the population of their,
that's reassuring.
Their study group,
yeah.
They also don't take into consideration what happens after, if it's a 2-week duration of the study, what happens the 15th day. If, the rest of them die, they still don't count that.
Exactly. That's
they have all
they
these
want a longer
parameters.
study, yeah.
Getting back to the funding of the spraying of the pesticides in our watershed, the money's coming from government sources.
I didn't realize, I bought a license plate with a whale on it because I thought it was a good thing. I'm funding this thing through my license plate? Wonderful, I'm thrilled.
Yeah. It's,
yeah. But again, George Will wrote an article about 15 or 20 years ago that said the biggest mistake the Founding Fathers made, back in the beginning of this country was legitimizing the idea of lobbying. They thought it would be a check and balance on government. They didn't think it would take over government, which is what's happened. So you have regulatory agencies in which, the regulators next year are working for the people that they were regulating, and then 3 years later they go back and regulate. It's this sort of old boy network with, in the Department of Agriculture, it was called the revolving door because they would work there for a couple of years, and then they work for Archer Daniels Midland for a couple of years, and they go back and forth, You see the same thing with FDA and drug companies. You see the same thing with EPA and pesticide companies. And the problem is that, you know, the culture of corruption is so pervasive in government that I'm not surprised. So they become, you know, occasionally you find somebody with some guts who actually does the right thing, but you know, the concept that they're there to serve their paymasters and not the citizens is fairly well entrenched. If you think about it, I mean, Monsanto is very clever. You know, the idea of setting up an environmental group to get rid of non-native species, which, you know, it sounds sort of good in a way, although, you know, that mean we're going to cut down all the eucalyptus trees?
They are doing that in certain areas.
And the palm trees. I mean, what is this, you know, is this some kind of, what is this nativism thing? I mean, if all the non-native species need to go, then those of us with light skin need to go too,
right.
And those with really, really dark skin also need to go because they're not native either. I mean, that leaves Chumash and a few other tribes, period. I think it's crazy. I mean, the cat is out of the bag. There's no practical way to get rid of all the non-native species without poisoning everything.
Yeah, and there are really good practical uses that we could use arundo.
Well, for the arundo, it's a great source of fiber.
Well, there's so many things. It's a medicinal.
Really?
It's edible.
Yeah.
It could be used as fodder for cattle as well.
Oh, really?
It can be used in building materials. It can be used to make paper, and I've actually had paper made out of arundo from the University of Washington.
So just cut it down and use it.
And they use it for biofuel up at Portland for Portland General Electric. They have a whole program going where they're actually paying to get arundo delivered to them so they can get this program going because they have to get off dirty coal.
So let's do the economics on this for a minute. So we've got a county which is scratching for money. We've got a natural resource which grows all over the place, which would probably, any idea how much the arundo in the county is worth each year since it keeps growing back, whether you spray it or not?
Well, it's got so many BTUs. It's one of the best plants for biofuel, for biomass.
So they could just harvest it every year and have a nice pristine river until next year, harvest it again, and keep doing that, not poison anybody, not poison any humans, not poison any birds or fish or whatever, not give anybody new cases of cancer or Parkinson's, which really aren't fun, and make money for the county, which is struggling, and put it into education or hospitals or whatever.
I actually talked to a man that has a business where he harvests arundo and has it woven into a matting material, which can be used in construction. And he was suggesting that we get the county to lease out lands, you know, so many acres of the arundo that someone would tend.
Yeah.
You know, harvest it and take care of it. And in the meantime, if they really truly want to get rid of it, they could employ some of those techniques like putting the plastic over it, solarization, or they could start actually getting the rhizomes out, which is a huge task.
Well, those are really deep and
but they're also medicinal and edible.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can make flour out of it. I mean, I've been finding out about all the non-native species how really they have so many uses, not just arundo.
This makes it so much more stupid, the supervisor's policy. It's just breathtaking. Here's a source of money, it's a source of food, it's a source of energy, it's a source of medicinals, and they're trying to kill it, but we know it doesn't work because it doesn't die when you spray it, but it does hurt the people and the fish and the birds and the deer and whoever else happens to be downwind or downstream.
Right. Getting back to the effects of the chemical on the watershed and on the people in our community, what are the long-term effects of having glyphosate in our atmosphere, in our water?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it gets stuck to particles of grit in the water, you know, stuff, the little kind of particulate stuff that gets into it. You can see it in your tap when you run it through. And that stays intact for quite a while. A lot of the glyphosate breaks down into several other chemicals which are more toxic than glyphosate, and those are in suspension for quite a while. I don't know that anybody's done with it. River, you know, probably a lot of it is going to wash down the hill into the underground reservoir where Ventura gets its water from, would be my guess, and it'll be splashing around in there waiting to be consumed by voters. I don't know how long it lasts off the top of my head. I mean, there have been studies in Denmark which show it around for a few months, but beyond that, I don't know.
There are different figures depending on the environment, the type of soil, the weather, but it doesn't really ever disappear because the metabolites, the things that it breaks down into, they don't disappear. There's the AMPA, the sarcosine, the methylamine, the formaldehyde, which actually is one of the
those
metabolites.
are all, unfortunately, and they're all toxic.
Yeah.
None of them is good. Yeah, do a little thought experiment, and the idea that something that'll kill some other life form is not harmful to us when we share so many enzymes and biological reactions. Another little thought experiment. Do you know that glyphosate is a very popular suicide technique in Japan? They just drink it and they die. Can't be that good for you.
No.
Again, that's one of these sort of blindingly obvious things that's probably a little hard for the supervisors to understand, but you know, there it is.
So getting back to the subject of filtration of the water, does that really protect us?
Well, it depends on how you do it. I mean, reverse osmosis is pretty good. Ceramic and charcoal are pretty good. They will pull out virtually all of the glyphosate, but you got to get a system. Either, the simplest and cheapest way to do that is you have these little sink things where you unscrew the screen from the tap and you screw this thing on, and when you want drinking water, you pull the plunger and it comes out the little spigot. And you can buy those. There's a place in Colorado that I send a lot of people to. They give people a 10% discount if they call, if they use my name. I don't get any kickbacks, unfortunately. But it does work very well. I mean, I've had our water tested. There's nothing in it. There's a lot of MTBE and whatnot in the water normally, but that's a gasoline additive, which is all over the place. That'll come out fairly effectively with these charcoal filters. It works with reverse osmosis as well.
But if you're showering in the water,
well, that's a good point. Shower filters are a different thing. The company that I was just mentioning is a really, really expensive one, which you don't really need. I mean, you can get a nice one for 30 or 40 bucks from American Environmental Health Foundation.
And what would you suggest to for people to do to detox if they are exposed to?
Well, that's a good question. The chemicals like this tend to deposit in your fat, and your body acts like kind of a little time-release capsule. You get a little whiff of the stuff in your bloodstream, and your balance isn't too good, or whatever whatever kind of symptoms you get. People get different symptoms from it depending on their own physiology. And what I try to do with my patients who've had overflowing rain barrels from one thing or another is a big body burden of stuff is. There's a genomic test that I do on their liver to see which enzymes work well and which ones don't. Since the Genome Project has identified that stuff, it's pretty easy, in most cases, biochemists have figured out ways to make the not so good enzymes work better. We can't change the genetics at the moment. Excuse me. We can't change the genetics at the moment, but we can change the behavior of the things that they produce to make them work better. We can change the behavior of the enzymes to make them work better with simple vitamin and mineral interventions usually. Once we've done that and got the liver working properly, things like sauna and exercise and so on are fairly effective. Avoidance of further contamination, clean water, organic food, not swimming in the river after they've sprayed Arundo or going up to the hot springs when it's blue with Arundo, in Matilaha Canyon.
So they add the coloring, the blue-green coloring.
Yeah, that's reassuring. That's
so
nice.
You can see where they've sprayed.
Yeah, and you can see to stay out of the hot water thing as well. Those are fairly effective, and over time, it's a slow process, but it does work pretty well.
Well, what I've found helpful is to take some homeopathics, and I don't know.
That'd probably work as well. I mean, there's, as far as stabilizing some of the short-term symptoms.
The short-term symptoms, like belladonna, actually has been really helpful.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
glyphosate affects.
Yeah, it affects the autonomic nervous system, so belladonna works against that effect. Homeopathic would be better. Major dose of belladonna would probably push it too far in the opposite direction.
Right, but the way that homeopathics work.
They're very gentle,
yeah. For those who've just joined us, we're speaking with Dr. Robin Bernhoft, an MD with specialty in environmental medicine, and we're speaking about pesticides in our environment. So, Dr.
Particularly glyphosate, the stuff that our supervisors are spraying in the water supply. But yeah, okay.
Yes. So I was just about to refer to the new study that came out in June 2011 about Roundup and birth defects. The question is the public being kept in the dark, and the study is saying yes, that since 1993 the industry has known that these effects could occur at lower and mid doses, having to do with glyphosate causing malformations in our experimental animals. And the German government has known since at least 1998 that glyphosate causes malformations. The EU the European Union Commission's expert scientific review panel knew in 1999 that glyphosate causes malformations. And so the public has been kept in the dark. We've been told that it's non-toxic, it's biodegradable, and don't worry about it, you can spray it anywhere you want.
Right.
So it's really a question of whether Monsanto and the people that have been telling us that it's unsafe have been doing...
Telling us that it's safe, you mean?
That it is, yeah. They've been telling us that it's safe, whether they should be held accountable.
Sounds like there's an element of criminal negligence there, at least, and perhaps conspiracy because they were given an incentive to keep it quiet. I don't know.
Right.
That's, you know, that's a very disturbing piece of information. One thing you need to realize about dosage, by the way, you know, in the early 1900s, toxicologists thought the poison makes the dose, which is true to an extent. But over the last 15 or 20 years, a lot of chemicals have been noticed. It's been noticed that tiny doses sometimes have the opposite effect of a really big dose, either for better or for worse. It's called hormesis, a hormetic effect. And dosage doesn't really mean that much, especially with things that affect hormones, for example, like glyphosate does. You know what the effective dose of Viagra in the bloodstream is? 4 parts per trillion. That's not much.
Wow.
That's like, you know, half a a spoonful in Lake Casitas or something like that. It's a very, very low dose. And you know, so the argument, well, that's not enough of a dose to make any difference, is really very obsolete by about 100 years.
Wow. Well, there's a Dr. Mei Wan Ho, a world-renowned geneticist and biophysicist and director of the Institute of Science and Society, has written many articles about glyphosate herbicide causing birth defects and causing superweeds. And she said that if people suffer ill health or death from glyphosate herbicides in the future, the company representatives, government regulators, and other scientists who pronounce these herbicides safe in the face of all the evidence should be liable to prosecution for criminal negligence or manslaughter.
Sounds reasonable. Either one of those would be fine with me. I mean, that's absolutely right. And you know, so that again raises the question, why are the supervisors spraying 12 tons of it in our water supply? Why, when it doesn't work? And it's just dangerous. You know, the thing to realize about birth defects, when you've got a little developing embryo, they're very vulnerable. It doesn't take much to, you know, particularly with hormonally active stuff like pesticides, it doesn't take much to cause radical changes in how the embryo develops. There's a huge amount of vulnerability at that point. And this is true actually for the first trimester at least, maybe longer, but early on, especially during embryonic life, you know, and maybe up to, you know, maybe 2-3 inches in size, there's a lot of potential disaster that can be caused by very, very small doses of a whole range of chemicals. So, you know, glyphosate sounds like it's behaving like a lot of its cousins.
Well, there are some good things going on.
That's good to know. I'm getting a little irritated here.
Actually, the LA Unified School District has a policy now where they do not use Roundup.
Excellent.
And
so somebody's paying attention.
Yeah, so they are going along the lines of the precautionary principle.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's excellent. Let's talk about the precautionary principle, something that's established in Europe. It hasn't been established here. The idea is that you have to prove before you can put a chemical in the environment or feed it to people or animals or whatever, you got to prove it's safe. In the United States up till now, things have been assumed safe until proven otherwise. Most of them aren't even tested. We've got 84,000 at least chemicals in our environment, most of which have never been tested. We have no idea. Actually, we do have a pretty good idea. We know that it's, I talked about Centers for Disease Control half an hour ago, that they are causing virtually all chronic illness, but you know. But anyway, so the precautionary principle is something the Canadians are developing as well, is the idea that you got to prove something safe before you use it. And if in this case it's been proven unsafe, it flunks. So you can't use it.
Mm-hmm.
And so LAUSD has figured that one out. That's good. You know, one thing that listeners or watchers need to remember is that supervisors get reelected. They run for office. They run for reelection, and they got to get more votes than whoever's running against them. So you got two choices. You can either scare them by saying, we're really not happy about you guys putting all this stuff in our water. You need to change, or I'm going to vote for somebody else next time. They get enough calls like that, you get their attention to whatever Monsanto said to them. So that's the first thing you can do. The second thing you could do is, if you're at all articulate, you can run for supervisor yourself and run against some of these people and say, you know, these guys have been poisoning us, and, you know, we don't like that. It's not appropriate. It's bad behavior, bad politics, bad public policy. Stop it. You guys got the power to do that. You just got to get out there and do it.
All right, so that wraps up our program for this evening. And Dr. Bernhoft, I want to thank you for joining us. And please let us know how we can contact you.
Well, I'd be happy to hear about that, or hear from people, because there's an awful lot of people I think would benefit from what I do. I'm up in Ojai at 1200 Maricopa Highway, Suite A. We're in the west wing of the Clinicus building. Clinicus has got a big sign in the street. Ours is around the corner. So if you see their sign, turn in the parking lot. We're back there. Phone number is 640-0180. And if you want to look on my website and read about some of the stuff I do, it's www.drbernhoft.com.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bernhoft, for joining us. We hope that you'll come back again soon.
Okay. Well, I was happy to be here, so I hope this will do some good.
And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us. I'm Patty Pagling with Pesticide Free Ojai Valley, and you can look us up at www.pesticidefreeohivalley.org. Thanks again for joining us.